Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I want to introduce you to a really interesting gentleman. Murtaza Haider is his name. He is a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University, formerly known as Ryerson, and he's written a bunch of different articles of late. I was initially really intrigued by an article that he wrote on Bill 23 and housing, and we'll undoubtedly come back to that. But he's also recently written a really interesting article about Chat GPT and how it's both positive and negative in the educational environment. And I thought maybe we'd actually start with that because it's quite the topical topic of late. Professor Hyder, welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. And glad to be here.
So tell me a little bit about what you think about Chat GPT. What you had said is that it's positive for some students that have learning disabilities and other problems, but it's a negative because of the fact, I guess, that it's almost like plagiarism.
Yes, so not necessarily plagiarism, but more like academic misconduct. Plagiarism is that when someone else has written something and you reproduce it with referencing them or acknowledging that someone else has done that. Now, ChatGPT is something that it's a computer code that generates original text every time. So yes, it will be plagiarized, but you're plagiarizing from ChatGPT and you can't prove it because every time you reproduce text from it, it will be original text. So it will be academic misconduct for sure because what you are portraying as yours is not your work. So yeah, I have had dozens of conversations with professors, some teachers, but mostly professors about what it means to their courses. Some of my colleagues are actually terrified
Terrified,
because they're in. Oh yes, terrified
terrified.
because
Really?
they have to redo their entire curriculum and the way they judge students' abilities or assurances of learning, as we call it in our field. So if you think about colleagues who teach history, they are actually asking people's knowledge about the past, and ChatGPT knows everything about the past, right? So it will be very difficult to come up with evaluation regimes by instructors to know whether this product that they have submitted, this deliverable, it could be an essay, a short or a long essay, has been written entirely by a computer code or has been helped by a computer code. So in this regard, they would have a bigger challenge. People teaching philosophy, people teaching English literature, people teaching history, their jobs would be quite difficult because they have to redo their entire courses. Someone like me who teaches mathematical modeling or application of statistical methods to real estate analysis, I can get away by asking questions that are part of the corpus used to train ChatGPT. So, for example, take just ChatGPT as an example. It learned everything that it could up until December 2021. So it did not know anything about 2022. So ChatGPT does not know that Argentina won the soccer World Cup, right? So if you ask who's the world champion, it's France for ChatGPT. So for me and other colleagues in academia who can ask questions that are more topical, they will be able to get away and find ways around this problem. But those who actually are asking and quizzing students about history, I mean, that's a big challenge. So we don't have an answer. There are people who think they can. There's some attention being paid to a student who said from University of Toronto said, "Oh, I figured out a way to identify ChatGPT." I don't think it's possible at this stage. Anyone who is a little bit smart can actually outsmart that algorithm that detects ChatGPT. I think the one thing that I've heard from the makers of ChatGPT is that they are willing to put these hidden signals or signatures in the text so that the one using it may not know, but maybe they will allow universities to see that hidden signature in the text to say, this was generated by ChatGPT. But these are the negatives that I've talked about. But think about the positives. There are so many students that we deal with in our education system, from kindergarten all the way to university, who have learning disabilities, and some of them have amazing imagination, amazing capabilities, but there's a limitation in expression. That somehow those ideas and imagination do not make their way to the paper. There is some stumbling block. There is some blockade there. ChatGPT can take people's ideas and imaginations and verbalize them for them, and that's going to be quite empowering for people who have been restricted because of this very focused but limitation. But it is a limitation for them. At the same time, if and I always invite people to say, take a walk through an engineering lab at a university in Canada. Just go through a civil engineering, mechanical engineering, industrial engineering lab at the University of Toronto, Waterloo, us at TMU, and you will see that the bulk of students doing PhD are international students. And if my memory serves me right, according to Statistics Canada, about 70+% of the people who were awarded engineering PhDs in Canada do not speak either English or French as their first language, which means that those who are being educated and are getting degrees in engineering, PhD degrees, are mostly international students who come to Canada, study, and hopefully they stay here and continue to contribute on the innovation industry. They are also facing the same challenge. English is not their first language, but they are quite capable in producing innovative solutions to the problems we face. So ChatGPT can help them verbalize their engineering solutions better. So it's the positives of ChatGPT and other such engines are far outweigh the negatives one can think of.
Sir, could you just step back for a minute and explain to our listeners what ChatGPT is? Some people think it's sort of artificial intelligence. Some people think it's like the computer on Star Trek. What is ChatGPT?
It is artificial intelligence. So it's a computer programs, models that are able to predict one word after the other. So it looks at the question, it then comes up with an answer saying, okay, this is the word, and then it can predict what's the next word after that should be. And such probabilistic way of building answers, that's how it does it. So it doesn't actually reproduce the text. It's deep learning artificial intelligence models that have gone through all the text that was made available to them, and based on some mathematical probabilities, they're able to construct sentences. For example, even in Microsoft Outlook or Google's Gmail, if you're writing your Gmail, you say, I'm pleased. You just say, I am pleased. And then you will see in great text, it would say to meet. It's suggesting those texts to you. So you can pick it up. No, I'm pleased to meet. And then it would say you after that. So it's suggesting the text to you as you are typing. That is artificial intelligence on a lower level. You just put artificial intelligence on steroids and you get ChatGPT.
But is it writing a whole essay? How can it predict a whole essay?
It can. In fact, this just became known November 30th or around that time. But before that, GPT is the model, GPT-3. And then ChatGPT is just one application of GPT-3 model. And GPT-4 is on its way. But before GPT, even with GPT-3, there's a book out there on artificial intelligence that was completely written, 4 chapters, completely produced by GPT. So a book on artificial intelligence was written by artificial intelligence. What the researchers did is they fed all the papers and books ever written on that particular topic, and then said, write 4 chapters. So the computer is knowledgeable enough to know what a book chapter looks like, right? So on a simplest form, like let's say I'm drinking tea from this mug. So this is how it works. I will train a computer program and show them maybe 5,000 pictures of mugs like this. Then I will show them 5,000 pictures of cell phones, right? And then I will ask the program to predict what's the next thing. So I show them a new mug. And because it has seen 5,000 mugs and 5,000 iPhones from before, 500,000 iPhones, it will say, this looks like a cup. This looks like an iPhone. this looks like a speaker, this looks like a pen. So this is how it learns, by looking at pictures that we would classify, saying this is a pen, this is a pencil, this is a computer, this is a cup. And then from there, we will show it unseen pictures that the program hasn't seen. And based on the pictures, thousands and millions of pictures it has seen before, it starts to classify them, right? And you're used to it, because if you have an iPhone or a Samsung Android phone, it starts labeling names. So you say, show me all pictures of my friends, and it would know who your friends are, because it has categorized them based on the pictures it's seen. So they just say, okay, this guy shows up every time, so must be a friend. So this is how these algorithms work. They have seen millions of chapters, millions of essays, tens of millions of essays, tens of millions of emails, tens of millions of writing samples, and they're able to then create a new one based on your instructions. Now, ChatGPT is a language model. Yes, there are other similar artificial intelligence tools that are producing music and painting and artwork. So you can type on there are a couple of tools where you go and say, okay, draw me a painting of a village in Ireland, like a rural settings in Ireland, but with some modern buildings that are reflective of the high-rise construction in Hong Kong, right? So you want to have Hong Kong-like construction in a rural setting from Ireland. That's all you just told the program. It will draw those artworks for you, those paintings with rural Irish landscape, but with Hong Kong like towers. So how does it do it? Because it knows what Hong Kong looks like. It knows how Ireland's Irish rural landscape countryside looks like, puts the two together and generates artwork for you. It can do the same. You can say, well, I like Mozart, write a symphony celebrating someone's anniversary in Mozart style, and do it in D minor, let's say, or whatever. I'm not a music person. It will generate that music.
So we don't need artists, we don't need poets, we don't need writers, we don't need composers anymore. All we need is ChatGPT.
Quite the contrary. Quite the contrary. The program is going to reproduce at an average scale what humans have done. But see, the writers don't write what others have written in the past. A good writer is writing something new. So what human beings are doing is they're creating new scholarship, new knowledge, new music. They are composing music that was not composed in the past. ChatGPT has a problem. All these GPTs have a problem, and that problem is their limitation to mimic what they have seen. So yes, think of it as a monkey that can do every trick that it has seen humans do, but it cannot invent its own tricks. For that, if you want new writing, new ideas, innovative music, innovative art forms, innovative paintings, innovative literature, that's still in the minds of human beings. So human beings, it's very hard, because we have curiosity as human beings, we have fears, we have paranoia, right? It's very difficult to make a computer paranoid, right? Like what we write and produce, it's not just being produced as a result of our strengths. We get jealous. I mean, jealousy produces such good art form if you really think about it. Written work.
And
Jealous,
love.
you get heartbroken, you're jealous, you sit down as a writer and then you write, right? So there's so much of lived experience. It would be very difficult for computer. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it will be some time before computers can start feeling jealous and then produce those original sentiments. But I think at this stage, my understanding is that it will be able to, like a monkey, it will be able to mimic us, but not innovate new tricks, not new things. And new things, new ideas, new music, you still need people. You need humans.
Fascinating conversation. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in 2 minutes, and we're going to switch to topic housing. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with Murtaza Haider, Professor Murtaza Haider. He is a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University. And, sir, you've really got quite the impressive background. And it's an interesting background because it's so varied. And I guess that's why we can talk about ChatGPT and housing all in the same conversation. So you've got a background where you've got a certificate in magazine journalism, and then you got a master's in civil engineering, and then you got a PhD in civil engineering. You were an associate professor in the School of Management, then a director of regionomics, an adjunct professor in research and development at McGill University, a professor at the Toronto Metropolitan University in real estate management, and an interim director at the School of Health Services Management. So journalism, health, engineering, business.
Yes. What we can take out health. That's just an administrative role I have. I have nothing to do with health. But I'm a civil engineer by training. I've done a bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in civil engineering. But my passion has always been writing. So I started my life as a writer, as a journalist. And so I was working as a reporter, then a copy editor, and then I got a chance to study journalism, formally study journalism at Ryerson, which I took, and then I studied journalism, continued to write, and then went back to engineering, did some more studies, and then became a professor at McGill. And from McGill, I came to then Ryerson, now TMU. So yeah, it's mostly in engineering and journalism. And then within engineering, my passion has been construction.
Construction.
Construction. I love the way cities grow. I love the way cities are built. So it's building cities, seeing them grow, planning them. Housing is just one aspect of that, but every aspect of that,
Well,
construction.
maybe we can touch on a couple different aspects of city building.
Yes.
But I think when I originally reached out to you, you had just written a really interesting article on Bill 23. And uh, the title was "Opposition to Building More Homes Faster Will Worsen Affordability." And you were arguing very strenuously that the far-reaching changes that the province of Ontario put in place in regards to Bill 23 were correct, and that you thought the criticisms of it were wrongly placed. Tell us a little bit about what you think about Bill 23, if you could.
Sure. So as I mentioned, my first academic appointment was at McGill University, where I was a professor of urban infrastructure planning and I was teaching students who were doing masters in urban planning. So I got a chance to understand how we produce urban planners. Like most people who look at it from outside don't know what the curriculum is in urban planning. How do we train? What are the exercises, assignments they do? And one thing that I realized at that time, it's especially for those who just do urban planning masters, because most people who have a master's in urban planning often don't have a bachelor's in urban planning. Very few people go to bachelor's in urban planning and then to masters. So there's only a limited time in which we can teach people or train them in the art and craft of urban planning. What I found and a big stumbling block is in the planning culture is that somehow we became gatekeepers to development. That is the urban planning profession, which is getting the building permits, getting the bylaws, the zoning bylaws approved, getting the subdivision plans approved. This has to go through the planning departments, and the planners look at it, and then because they are the custodians of what we call the land use plan, and land use plan is basically saying what gets built where and at what type of construction, where it gets built, how it gets built, and so on and so forth. Now this is all happening, but there's one thing that I always thought that's missing is that hardly any planning curriculum, with the exception of few, have urban economics or land economics as part of the curriculum to train urban planners. I think I've been arguing it for 25 years that we should have formal land economics included in the planning curriculum. Now you say what it has to do with Bill 23. One of the biggest concerns we have is that the time it takes to get approvals for new planned construction, it's too long. It takes
Like the
months.
longest in North America or the Western world, I understand.
Yes, and not only this, there's tremendous amount of literature. Nobody is disputing it, that places where it takes longer to get zoning approvals, housing prices are high and affordability is worsened there. That literature is without debate. It just says the longer the planning process, more delay it takes, the worse the housing affordability. What happens is that supply gets delayed. Now, my doctoral dissertation at that time, it was late 90s. Instead of looking at housing demand, I looked at housing supply. How much housing we build, who builds it, how we build it, where it gets built. And interestingly, I haven't seen many people, maybe one or two, but I have not seen much on housing supply research. But what I found was that our supply side was weakened and weakening and weakening and weakening, which means that we have been building fewer homes relative to our size than what we did before. And I'll give you some numbers. See, in the 1970s, early 70s, we were building 10,000 to 12,000 homes per million people in Canada. Right? If our population is certain million, for every 1 million people, we were building 10,000 to 12,000 new homes every year. Now, fast forward 1990s to 2000, that number plummeted to 5 to 6,000 new homes per million people. And for many years, not only that we were building less homes, fewer homes relative to our population, we were in fact building fewer homes relative to what we built in absolute terms in the 70s. So what it means is that we just kept on adding adding to the gap or adding to the shortfall in housing year after year, and we did it for 5 decades. And one of the contributing factors was that it was taking too long, too difficult to get approvals. Now, that's not the only problem. I mean, planners will tell you, rightly so, that even when they approve projects, the builders sometimes don't follow through on building. They're not, the approvals are there, the plans have been built, and nothing is being done. And so they would tell you that tens of thousands of units are sitting with approvals, but nothing is happening. So that is also true. So it's not just one side of the story. But the bottom line is, at the end of the day, you'd rather hold one aspect of it being responsible or the other for lack of supply, but the lack of supply has been the main case and has been the case for 5 decades. So this legislation tries to limit the ways individuals or institutions can stop, prevent, or slow down the construction of new housing. And that I think we need to do, because I've got 50 years of inaction or 50 years of inadequate action that has contributed to this growing housing price. And people are looking at prices marching much faster and rising much faster than their incomes, and they're wondering, will they ever be able to own or will we afford to own a house? And one of the contributing factors is that we're not building enough. You have too many people going after a few homes, and then what happens when supply is scarce, demand is high, prices continue to increase. So this bill is targeting, it's limiting neighbors' the ability to block others from densifying. You try to build a 3-unit instead of 1, and then suddenly everybody gangs up against you, and you're not able to do so. It puts restriction on neighbors' ability to limit densification in their areas, because let's face it, we can either build on greenbelt, which would be horrible, or we densify the neighborhoods that we have already paved. I believe that the better way to build more homes is to build in existing places where we have already constructed, where we have paved over green space. Let's just densify there first. And when we run out of every square inch of developable land, then we would look elsewhere. But right now, I think there's tremendous opportunity to densify and build more homes and accommodate the future neighbors. I think we have to look at population growth as welcoming future neighbors to the community, so that we can grow the economy. Otherwise, the economy doesn't grow. We have an aging population. People who oppose development and housing and construction don't realize they're heading to their retirements, and they think that somehow the pension plans will continue to pay, not realizing that somebody has to contribute to the pension plan so they can get their pension. And that will only happen if your economy grows and there are more workers. More people are going to retire in the next 10 years than they will graduate from universities, minus immigration or growth in numbers. So you have to be very careful. You don't want to jeopardize your own welfare by opposing housing. You don't have housing, you don't attract workers, you will slow down the growth, and that is not the future anyone wants.
But urban planners think that they want to have a point of view on height. They want to have a TP such that the biggest height is at Yonge Street, and then it comes down floor by floor as you get farther away. That they want to have a point of view on how many parking stalls you have, how many bike racks you have, what the materials are that you use on the building, whether you've got retail or office or hotels or fitness centers or just buildings. They want to have a point of view of how many square footage of amenity space you have. They want to have a lot of regulatory review and input. They want to have meetings. They want to have meetings with an arborist, with a heritage person, with an urban planner, with a design planner, with a landscape architect, with a traffic engineer, with a geotechnical engineer. They want you to meet with a counselor. They want you to meet with the neighborhood. They want you to meet with neighboring developments. They want, if you disagree with all that, to go to the OLT, the Ontario Land Tribunal, to have a hearing. Isn't all that good stuff?
I don't find anything wrong with it as long as it doesn't delay the development. We have to give the system a deadline saying this is the application date. It has arrived today. You have 3 months to do whatever meetings you want to hold. It cannot be a 3-year process. It cannot be iterative. It cannot be back and forth. It cannot be we're still thinking about it. You've got 3 months, 3 weeks, whatever deadlines we say. We won't tell you how you're going to do your work. That's not our job. We shouldn't be overstepping our bounds. We let the profession decide how and who they want to consult and why they want to consult. That's their prerogative. We just tell them this is the time frame. And I think as long as we have reasonable, predictable timelines for approval processes, that basically you've got 3 months or 6 months to do this. If you cannot do this, consider it approved. Then I think things will move fast. Right now, I don't think there's an upper limit on how long it may take for the development application to be approved or denied. I mean, denial, if you're not happy, deny it. The denial is also not there. So it's just going back and forth and back and forth, and it takes months. We're not saying rubber stamp everything. That's hard, certainly not the intent, nor the advocacy for such a role. You're saying whatever decision you have to make, give yourself a deadline and do it. You don't think it merits this proposal merits approval? Deny it. Do it in 3 months. Deny it so that people can move on. If they can challenge, if the developer wants to challenge, they can challenge in another platform. But just keep on going on it. We have got another hearing, and we've got another community group coming in, and we've got another person, and now we're looking at geotechnical. And now, of course, just get this thing right away. So these are the things that some of these things, as of right development, and some of these concerns have been addressed in the bill, and that's why I like it. Minus this issue of building on the green belt, I find the rest of the proposals quite amenable.
So I do think that, and it's been stated numerous times, that it takes longer to get approval to build something than it actually does to build it. And I think that is wrong. And so I think that the regulatory approval time frame is an issue. But I also think that the amount of regulatory involvement in condo building, house building, et cetera, is order of magnitude greater than it is in so many other different segments of our society. For some reason, we've allowed local councillors to have a far greater role in approvals than we ever would a local MPP or an MLA and any other product segment of our society. And the planning department, I used to be in the pharmaceutical business there. You know what? You had a health department, the Canadian Health Department or the FDA in the United States that very justifiably took a look at your tests. But it's interesting. They didn't tell you how many, pills you could have in a bottle, like how many parking lots you would have. The regulatory, it was like a yes/no decision. It wasn't a whole bunch of suggestions and changes and shading studies and things like that. The regulatory imposition
Yes.
in the real estate business, I think, is higher than almost any other industrial segment of our society.
Yes, I think the challenge here is the way local governments work and the way local governance is conceived. The councillor, any councillor, is not entrusted or responsible to think about any other aspects of other than their local domain. Like, this is my ward, and I'm gonna be answerable to the voters in my ward, right? And the voters are the existing owners whose vested interest is in preserving the status quo, right? So imagine a councillor gets elected, and he or she has no other option but to listen to those who elected him or her, and then preserve the status quo. So that's a big problem, because if the status quo is not in the interest of the larger society, and what's good for the ward may not be good for the city or the country. I give you the primary example of it is the Scarborough subway extension, right? And I know that our Mayor Tory has favored it and voted for it, and many other councillors. But the reality is that this is a useless project. Now, I say this with a degree in transportation engineering and having the time, leisure, and benefit of reviewing all the reports on this matter. I have yet to see a technical report that says that replacing the LRT system or a bus system, bus rapid transit system, with this one-stop subway will serve the mobility needs of Scarborough residents better than the status quo, which is a rapid transit, or a more efficient bus rapid transit on dedicated rights of way. Now, there's no engineering planning report that I have seen. I've spoken to pretty much all the planners who are in the academic field, transportation engineers and planners, and no one has ever told me that, yes, there's a report that they wrote or somebody else did that makes the case for this. But then you ask yourself, how is it possible that with no technical and economic benefit to the city, Scarborough subway extension got funded to the tune of $5 billion. I don't know how many more billions it will take to complete it, but that's the money that we will spend building this one-stop subway. It's a one-stop subway. It's like it should get the gold medal for tunnel vision, because the money is going into digging a tunnel and then moving people into the tunnel, and there's no stops. It's not really going to serve the people of Scarborough. But what happens is that local politics kick in. The councillors are just looking at the ward, right? I want a subway in my ward, right? What do you think? Scarborough residents are lesser human beings? We deserve a subway. No, there are socioeconomic and land use characteristics that have to materialize first before subway becomes viable, right? You had Shepherd subway extension. Well, guess what? This reality. There are fewer riders on most Shepherd subway stops, with the exception of one. There are fewer riders on those stops than the Dufferin bus carries on a daily basis. More people on the Dufferin bus than those who ride on the subway stations that we build on the Shepherd.
So why do we have a subway on Dufferin?
Exactly. So see, that's a good thing. You remind this thing that you have asked just now is something that I asked, and I got an answer from my former mentor, late Professor Gene Wolfe at McGill University, who was my senior colleague there when I joined as an assistant professor. And I asked Gene, how did the city figure out where to put Montreal? How did Montreal figure out where to put the subway? Did they do a study? And say they might have done a study, but the reality is they looked at the busiest bus routes in Montreal, and the busiest bus routes were replaced with subways, right? That's how you do it. You look at the busiest subway routes.
And you're suggesting you did it differently in Toronto?
Yeah, well, look at this. Scarborough subway would once you spend $6 billion there, will run empty the way Shepherd subway has been running empty for decades. The reality is that people just don't start taking transit rights just because you've built the service. Build and they will come. That does not necessarily materialize. Even in Montreal, a funny thing happened to me. So now I'm in Montreal as a professor. And one day, a year later, I had to go to Université de Montréal, which is, you go up, take a subway, and then you go on the east-west line, the blue line, I think. So I'm standing on the subway station, and the train arrives, and it stops like 50 feet away from me. And I'm on the subway, and I said, why is it stopping that far? So I run to the subway train and board on it. And then I realized this train has only 3 cars. So the subway that got built in 70s with 6 cars in mind that will be full runs only on 3 cars. At least that time when I was there, it was 2002 or 2003. So after building a subway line 20, 30 years ago, they didn't have enough demand to fill the 6 cars, so they were running it with 3 cars only. So that's your proof there, that it doesn't mean that you build subway and suddenly riders will start falling from trees. You're spending taxpayers' money. You should have good reasons to put billions of dollars in ground. If you cannot guarantee riders, don't waste people's money. This is taxpayers' money, like $1 billion in Shepherd subway line, $5-6 billion here. That's a lot of money. We have got our hands deep into people's pockets. We have to be very careful, transport engineers, planners, and urban planners, because at the end of the day, if the project is not serving or delivering at the desired capacity, then we have done a disservice rather than a service.
Well, I got to tell you that I think it was the Neptus Foundation that did a major study that suggested that elevated LRTs, which is the SkyTrain in Vancouver or the new REM in Montreal, work fine and people quite like, and they actually might prefer than an underground subway because I actually can look out the window and see what's going on in the outside world. But for some reason, Toronto was all about subways. And I think it was our former mayor, Rob Ford, and our current premier, Doug Ford, that really got us hooked onto this subways attitude. And politics, Mel Lastman, was certainly important in the construction of the Shepherd subway. I think that
Isn't
former
it a
Minister of Finance
failure?
Greg Sabero was probably material involved in the extension of the university line to Vaughan. And you talked about the one subway extension. My own personal unfavorite, unfavored example is I was a long proponent of the Dundas subway rather than the Hurontario LRT, or a Dundas LRT rather than the Hurontario LRT. And I think that there's going to be few people in Mississauga that go between Brampton and Port Credit. But if you actually had something across Dundas going from UTM to the Kipling subway, it would have been incredibly efficient. And if you take a look at the bus traffic on Dundas is far superior, far greater than the bus traffic on Hurontario. And I understand that the bus traffic on Eglinton is actually far greater than the bus traffic on Hurontario. Anyway, we're going to
This
take a
is
break for some
all
messages. We're going to take a break for messages and be back in 2 minutes with the professor. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting with Professor Murtaza Haider. He's a professor in, I guess, civil engineering and real estate, et cetera, at the Toronto Metropolitan University, the former Ryerson. Sir, we're going to change topic to a couple other things, but I interrupted you unfairly. I apologize. You were going to say something about my proposition on LRTs and subways.
So going back to the Hurontario line, the proponents think that this line, and I have actually read reports that said initially when they did the modeling, they realized that it will carry more people than King Street, the streetcar that runs on King Street. And when they realized that it's not possible, it's absolutely not possible. So this year we revised our modeling, and now we have lower forecast. But I remember reading that report and say, how can your modeling frameworks be so out of touch that you would look at Ontario, look at the land use around it, and look at the population and employment densities there, and look at the origin destination patterns of the trips, and then confuse it to be such that it would produce more transit riders than the King Street corridor, which is impossible, right? One of the highest, most dense neighborhoods along King Street, and look at Ontario, which is your classic suburb. So then I realized that once you are getting to the business of being a proponent for LRT, especially rail-based transit, then all sorts of funny numbers come out. There's a researcher by the name Brent Flivberg, who wrote this very interesting book called Mega Projects and Risk. And if you have any interest in transit or transportation planning, read that book, Mega Projects and Risk, because that book shows how these ridership forecasts have been deliberately exaggerated 2, 3, 4 times to get the projects approved. And when the projects are built, hardly any ridership there that would match the forecasted one. My fear is that if I believe in mega projects and risk, one of the classic textbooks written on this, I think Hurontario would be another case study for the next edition of that book.
Oh, God. Fantastic. Thank you for that. You recently wrote an article about rents in Quebec, and it was kind of provocative because you were saying that rents in Quebec, yes, are cheaper, but so are the jobs and the house sizes and everything else. So tell me a little bit about the argument you made, sir.
Oh, the argument there is, I think, what I like to say is that most people are one variable experts. They look at one thing, and that's the only thing they look at in their life. So, for example, there are people who are rental advocates, that say that rentals are all around, and they say, well, you look at Quebec, they have cheaper rents. You know why? Because they've got rent control. The reality is, no, that is not the reason, actually. The rents are cheaper in Quebec because incomes are significantly lower in Quebec. Rents are cheaper in Quebec because people's household sizes are smaller. Rents are cheaper in Quebec because there's a culture that is predisposed to renting than ownership. So there was a report done by one of the real estate companies that said, look at this town in Quebec. Their rent is the lowest in any large urban area in Canada. And look at Oakville in Ontario. And then say, you know the reason? Rent control. I say, hold on. How did you miss that this town in Quebec, including Montreal, which is the largest town, most populous town in Quebec, the average household income after tax income is around $65,000. $65,000. And in towns where housing is cheaper, rents are cheaper, the incomes are even lower, 62, 60,000 after $1,000 after tax. And then you move to Oakville and you say, okay, wait a second, Oakville has higher rents, but let me just look at what the average household income after tax income is there. Oh, wait a second, that's $130,000. So you see, those two demographics are completely different. So somehow we overlook this tremendous gulf in average household income, in average spending power, in average consumption power, the difference in taste. And then we just say, no, the only reason we think of is rent control. Rent control has nothing to do with it. It has to do with people's ability to pay what they earn. Then I said, look at Montreal. 1/5 of Montreal was built, maybe something around that number. 20% or more of the homes were built since 1990. It's older housing stock in Montreal. Now let's look at Oakville. Half of the housing that exists in Oakville today did not exist in 1990. So not only that you have newer housing, modern housing, it is also not the case in Montreal or in Quebec. Then the dwellings are much larger on average in Ontario and other places where rents are expensive. So if you go through the list of the demographics, that is larger household sizes, more people, larger families in Ontario, elsewhere than in Quebec, bigger homes in Ontario than in Quebec, newer homes in Ontario than in Quebec, and above all, much, much, much larger incomes in Ontario, after tax incomes in Ontario than in Quebec. That is the reason why rents are cheaper in Quebec. That's the reason. So for me, it's always a surprise. I read newspapers all the time. I read even academic research. They miss all of these
One
contributing
variable experts.
factors.
I love that line. One
The one
variable
variable,
experts.
because rent control and rents. That's it.
So,
So
so let's ask the question: Are the rent
expertise
controls
is
do rent controls make sense?
no, not rent controls. Okay, so here's another thing. Paul Krugman, Professor Paul Krugman, who writes for New York Times, is a Nobel laureate in economics, so he must know a thing or two about economics. He wrote that economists seldom agree on anything, right? Like they always say, on the other hand, and then give you a counter argument. He said, rent control is one such thing where there is almost a consensus, and that's that rent controls hurt the very people we think they would help, which means that rent controls prevent the construction of new housing. It slows down the new construction. It provides a incentive for the landlords to maintain dwellings in a state of good repair. So, number one, existing tenants don't get good housing, well-maintained housing, because the cost of ownership is going up, but the rent isn't. And then it discriminates against future renters, because existing renters are in rent control buildings, let's say, but the future renters will not be, because nobody wants to build purpose-built rental housing. In fact, up until now, with the exception of Montreal, there's hardly been any purpose-built rental construction in Canada. I think there's only a resurgence. I've started to see that the graphs are changing now after 50 years of almost no purpose-built rental construction. There's some now, but my fear is, and I have to confirm this fact, this is just a hypothesis, that the resurgence in purpose-built rental construction that we see now is not on the affordable side. It's going to be on the more expensive purpose-built rental with all the bells and whistles.
Recent article that suggested that there has been a lot of rental housing building, but it's all been condos bought by investors that are renting out their condos on a one-off basis, and so therefore, there isn't a lot of the same sort of efficiency in landlord expenses and in maintenance, et cetera. And all we've done is effectively.
So Montreal is an exception. Montreal and Halifax are the two large cities where purpose-built rentals, not condominiums, but purpose-built rentals are now being built, and there are more purpose-built rentals being built than ground-oriented housing or condominiums. But this is true for Montreal and Halifax. And Halifax is a different story, maybe for another time. We wrote a column on why Halifax.
We're going to take a break, final break, and come back with some final questions and comments from our professor in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having fun tonight chatting with Professor Murtaza Haider of the Toronto Metropolitan University, expert on urban development, on building, on construction, on transit, on infrastructure, on chat GPT, and a whole bunch of other things. Rental in Halifax, Montreal versus Oakville and Toronto, amongst other things. I got to ask you a couple of quick questions, if I could, in the last minutes that we've got. Development fees were another big part of Bill 23 and a big restriction. And the argument, I guess, that Premier Ford has been making as he travels across the country, across the province, is that development fees increase the price of housing and impact negatively affordability and really are a tax on new home buyers. Do you agree with that, or do you agree with the mayors that are arguing no, they need development fees to fund all needed services and growth pays for growth?
I actually agree with both, and this is how I agree with the premier is quite the development charges are a very large component of the price people pay. People think that foreign home buyers are responsible for the expensive house, but they don't realize the big bulk chunk of that expensive price is the development charges that people pay to the municipalities. Now, the question is that there has to be a limit on those charges so that we need to bring the price of new construction. These are soft costs. So the hard costs are land and construction, and the soft costs are the costs that pay for planning approvals and development charges and whatnot. So there has to be a break in those. And we know that the hard costs are going up because labor supply is short and the construction material is in short supply because of the disruptions to the supply chain. But why I agree with the mayors and local governments is that in the absence of that revenue, the province has to step in and say, you give a break on development charges and whatever revenue loss is, the province will kick in. So I think that's the right approach. It's a partnership between the two layers of government, the local government and the province. That we give a break on development charges, more construction happen, but that revenue gap that it creates, the province should step in and say, here's the revenue that you lost. So this should be a revenue neutral exercise for the local governments.
Now you sound like an economist on the one hand and on the other hand. Just kidding.
Exactly. There you go. Almost like a counselor.
Last question. Inclusionary zoning. Is it good? And it in Bill 23 has been restricted to only 5% of development. So is inclusionary zoning good, or is it good to limit it to 5%?
I don't have strong feelings about this. It's something that I have not really studied in detail, so I have got some preliminary ideas about it. I think, again, it is the state's responsibility to provide affordable housing. Right. And it's not the responsibility of the landlords by saying that you can't charge what rents you need to afford it, nor is it necessary to restrict builders and developers into saying you have to build this or that. I think the state should take responsibility of building affordable housing. We haven't built affordable housing or social housing to the extent that we need. Our social housing stock in Toronto, the city of Toronto, is less than 5% of the total housing there, and I think we need to build there. So if inclusionary zoning can deliver on that goal, then yes, but I don't think it can deliver on this because see, you're trying to provide affordable housing in places where land prices are very high. So the incentive is not there. So you have to capitalize on where land prices are low. And especially if you want to build inclusionary zoning, take land that is public land, right? The municipal governments have land, the provincial government have land, federal government has urban land, which is currently for defense purposes or aerodomes and whatnot. Build inclusionary or affordable housing there because you own the land. So whatever you will build there will be cheaper rather than going into downtown Toronto, looking at one of the most expensive parcels on in this country and say, on this most expensive parcel, we would like you to build inclusionary housing there. Doesn't make sense. Inclusionary would only be affordable if it is built on affordable land. And that's how I see it.
Professor Haider, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I really appreciate your views. I'm an avid reader of your columns. Thank you for that. I hope we get to check in with you again. And I got to say to everyone listening, I think that this Bill 23 has a lot of positives to it. It's come under a lot of attack from municipal politicians primarily. I do think that Professor Haider's comment in regards to this partnership, such that if municipalities lose revenue because of the reduction in in development fees. And there's some other things that they might lose as well, Section 23 type parts of regulation as well. I do think that the province should be compensating the municipalities, because to increase property taxes to compensate for the losses is probably not the right thing to do. That said, I am convinced that the development fee reduction makes sense. I'm convinced that the speed up of approvals makes sense. And probably I'm convinced that the regulatory anchor, the huge amount of regulatory issues that you have to deal with in the real estate industry really are far greater than in almost any other segment of our society, and I think that needs to be reduced. I don't think that consumers, the public, really value it. I think they just want really good stuff built, and in so many other segments of our society, whether it be taxis or travel or renting hotels. We seem to be far more comfortable with mass approvals and criticisms as ways of justifying whether we want to use something, not needing to have taxi regulators, hotel regulators, or travel regulators getting involved all the time. And I think that the planning departments are one area where we really haven't had any kind of modernization. And we are living in a world of, as you've described, where the planner's trying to restrict and impede development rather than making what makes economic sense for the community. Anyway, thank you, Professor Haider, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. I remind you, I'm on at 6 o'clock every Monday through Friday at 9:60 a.m. You can stream me online, even from downtown Toronto, at www.saga960am.ca. Good night, everybody.